Welcome to the Empire of Secrets. Every episode, we peel back the cover on history's strangest mysteries. From lost cities and secret files to sightings that refuse to be explained. We follow the evidence, question the official story, and tell the stories that textbooks skip. Ready to go past the surface? Let's dive in. The lost colony of Roanoke. Disappearance, discovery, and the birth of an American mystery. In the long history of exploration and colonization, few stories are as haunting or as unresolved as that of the lost colony of Roanoke. It's one of America's oldest mysteries. A story that begins with hope, ambition, and the dream of a new world, and ends in silence. No battle, no grave, no survivors. Only a single word carved into a tree. Croatoan. For over 400 years, historians, archaeologists, and storytellers have tried to uncover what happened to the more than 100 men, women, and children who vanished from Roanoke Island off the coast of North Carolina in the late 1500s. Tonight, we'll trace their journey. From the promise of England's first colony to the chilling enigma that still captures imaginations today. The beginning, England's New World dream. The story of Roanoke begins in an age of ambition. The late 16th century was a time when empires competed for the riches of the Americas. Spain had grown powerful through conquest and gold. France had carved out its own claims in the north. And England, under Queen Elizabeth I, wanted its share of the New World. The idea was not just wealth, but power. A permanent English colony across the Atlantic could challenge Spain, spread Protestantism, and open a new era of trade and exploration. The dreamer behind this plan was Sir Walter Raleigh, an explorer, courtier, and favorite of the Queen. In 1584, Raleigh received a royal charter to explore and colonize lands in North America. He sent 2 expeditions to scout the coast, and they returned with glowing reports of a fertile island just off present-day North Carolina. They called it Roanoke. It was described as rich in resources, full of game, fertile soil, and friendly native peoples. To Queen Elizabeth, it sounded like paradise. Raleigh named the new territory Virginia in her honor, for the Virgin Queen. The first attempts. The first English settlers arrived on Roanoke Island in 1585, led by Sir Richard Grenville and Governor Ralph Lane. But this was no easy paradise. They faced storms, dwindling supplies, and strained relations with the local Algonquian-speaking tribes. At first, the English tried to trade and coexist, but misunderstandings turned into conflict. The colonists accused the native people of stealing their supplies. The natives, in turn, saw the newcomers as violent intruders. By 1586, tensions had erupted into bloodshed. Lane's men killed the local chief, Wingina, and the fragile peace collapsed. That same year, the settlers were rescued by Sir Francis Drake, who had stopped by after raiding the Caribbean. They abandoned the island and sailed home. When a supply ship arrived weeks later, it found Roanoke deserted. Despite this failure, Raleigh was not discouraged. He was determined to establish an English presence in the New World. And so, a new colony was planned, one that would include not just soldiers, but families. A permanent settlement built for the long term. The 1587 colony, a new hope. In 1587, a group of about 115 people, men, women, and children, set sail from England under the command of John White, an artist and mapmaker who had been part of the earlier expedition. White's goal was to establish a self-sustaining colony, ideally in Chesapeake Bay, farther north. But fate had other plans. When the ships reached Roanoke, They found the remains of the previous settlement, abandoned and overgrown. For reasons still debated, the settlers decided to stay there instead of continuing to Chesapeake. They rebuilt what they could, repaired the fort, and began life anew. Among the settlers were White's daughter, Eleanor Dare, and her husband, Ananias Dare. That summer, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World. It should have been a hopeful beginning. But the colony's troubles began almost immediately. Trouble and departure food was scarce. Relations with nearby tribes were uneasy. The friendly Croatoan people, who lived on nearby Hatteras Island, offered some assistance, but other groups were openly hostile. White, recognizing the danger and desperate for supplies, decided to return to England to gather reinforcements. He promised to come back quickly, within months. But as soon as he reached home, disaster struck. England was preparing for war with Spain, and all ships were commandeered to defend against the Spanish Armada. For 3 long years, White was unable to return. When he finally set sail back to Roanoke in 1590, his heart must have been heavy with dread. What he found was worse than he could have imagined. The disappearance. When John White arrived at Roanoke Island, the settlement was empty. The houses had been dismantled. The fort's palisades were intact but weathered. There were no bodies, no signs of violence, no graves. Everything and everyone was gone. But there were 2 clues. On one post, White found the letters C-R-O carved into the wood, and on a nearby tree a single word, Croatoan. White recognized it immediately. Croatoan was the name of the nearby island, home to the Croatoan tribe who had been friendly to the English. He took it as a hopeful sign, a message from the colonists indicating where they had gone. They had agreed before he left that if they ever had to move, they would carve a message and add a cross if they were in danger. There was no cross. White believed they were safe. He planned to sail immediately to Croatoan Island, but a violent storm forced his ship off course. The crew refused to risk another attempt, and the expedition returned to England. White never saw his daughter or granddaughter again. The fate of the lost colony remained a mystery. Theories and speculation. From that moment on, the story of Roanoke became one of history's most debated puzzles. How could more than 100 people simply vanish, leaving no trace? Over the centuries, scholars have proposed countless explanations. The most logical and most hopeful is that the colonists relocated and assimilated with the Croatoan people. This would explain the carvings, the lack of struggle, and the dismantling of their homes for reuse elsewhere. Some later European settlers claimed to encounter Native American tribes with English words, gray eyes, or European features, though these accounts are impossible to verify. Still, many historians believe some form of assimilation is the most plausible outcome. Others propose darker endings. One theory suggests the colonists moved inland and were wiped out by hostile tribes. Another claims they tried to sail back to England on their own and were lost at sea. A few even believe they fell victim to starvation or disease and were buried in unmarked graves. There's also the possibility of Spanish intervention. At the time, Spain controlled much of the Caribbean and the southeastern coast. Spanish patrols occasionally raided English outposts. Some historians think Spanish forces could have discovered Roanoke and destroyed it in secret. But again, no definitive evidence exists. The mystery of Roanoke is not one of what we know, but of what we don't. Archaeology and the search for evidence for decades Roanoke's fate was treated as legend, a ghost story from the age of exploration. But in the 20th and 21st centuries, archaeology began to offer new clues. In recent years, excavations have uncovered artifacts that might point to the colonists' movements. On Hatteras Island, the Croatoan site, archaeologists have found fragments of English pottery and tools from the late 1500s. Farther inland, at a site called Site X, near the Albemarle Sound, similar artifacts suggest some settlers may have split off and established a smaller community there. These findings don't solve the mystery, but they make one thing clear. The colonists didn't simply vanish into thin air. They moved, adapted, and tried to survive. The disappearance of Roanoke wasn't an act of magic. It was a tragedy of isolation. Cut off from England, facing hunger, weather, and conflict, they likely merged with local tribes and gradually lost their English identity over generations. In a sense, they succeeded, not as a colony, but as survivors who became part of a new world. The legend of Croatoan. Still, the mystery endures, not because of evidence, but because of imagination. That single word, Croatoan, has taken on a life of its own. It's been found in literature, film, and folklore as a symbol of disappearance. Writers from Edgar Allan Poe to Stephen King have used it as a harbinger of the unknown. Some versions of the legend even claim supernatural forces were at work: curses, witchcraft, alien abduction, even time travel. These are the stories that keep Roanoke alive, not just in history books, but in the collective imagination. Why? Because the unknown is irresistible. When history offers silence, myth steps in to fill the void. Cultural legacy. The lost colony has become part of American identity, the nation's first great unsolved mystery. It speaks to the tension between exploration and hubris, courage and tragedy. The colonists of Roanoke were pioneers, the first to try to plant English roots on American soil. Their failure paved the way for others, Jamestown, Plymouth, who would learn from their mistakes. In that sense, Roanoke's disappearance wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of another. The creation of a mythology that shaped how Americans see their origins: bold, mysterious, and tinged with loss. Every summer, the story is retold in the outdoor drama The Lost Colony on Roanoke Island, a play that has run for nearly a century. And every generation of historians, archaeologists, and dreamers continues the search. Because even now, 400 years later, the hope remains that one day the truth will emerge from the soil or the sea. Why it still captivates us. The story of Roanoke endures because it sits at the crossroads of history and myth. It's a story of ambition, of a small group of people daring to build a new world. And it's a story of loss, of how easily dreams can be swallowed by the unknown. But more than anything, it's about the human urge to explain what can't be explained. The colonists' disappearance became a mirror for every generation's fears and fascinations. The fragility of civilization, the cost of exploration, the thin line between discovery and disappearance. And maybe that's why we still tell it. Because every time we look into the void of history and ask, what happened? We're really asking, could it happen to us? Closing reflection. Imagine it, the year 1590. A ship anchors off a quiet island. The captain steps ashore. The wind stirs the trees. The settlement is empty. The sun beats down on weathered timbers and silent houses. No voices, no footprints. Only a single word, carved into wood. A message from the vanished, Croatoan. It's not just a clue. it's a warning that history forgets, that nature reclaims, that the line between civilization and wilderness is thinner than we think. In the end, the lost colony of Roanoke is both a historical puzzle and a parable, a story about beginnings and endings, about hope and silence, about how even the greatest dreams can fade into mystery. And maybe that's the real legacy of Roanoke, not what we lost, but what we keep searching for. If you enjoyed this journey into one of history's oldest unsolved mysteries, make sure to subscribe and join us next time as we uncover more stories where history meets legend and truth is stranger than fiction. Until then, remember, some mysteries are never meant to be solved, only told. Thanks for listening to The Empire of Secrets. If this episode sparked your curiosity, leave a like, drop a comment with your theory, and subscribe for new episodes every week. Want more sources or a follow-up deep dive? Tell us in the comments and we'll cover it next. Stay curious and see you in the next episode.